the golden child. I was 17 years old when I realized my parents had given up on me. While they spent $50,000 on my brother's college prep, SAT tutors, application consultants, even a college strategy coach, they handed me a Target gift card for my birthday and suggested I consider community college. They had no idea I was secretly applying to MIT. They had no idea I would score higher on the SAT than my golden child brother. And they definitely had no idea that in 6 months, I would shatter every assumption they'd ever made about their average daughter. This is the story of how the invisible child became impossible to ignore. How I went from grocery store cashier to MIT researcher while my family wasn't even watching. And how sometimes being overlooked is the greatest gift you never knew you needed. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should believe in you most, then this story is for you. Kindly hit that subscribe and like button right now, because what happens next will change how you think about potential, family, and the power of believing in yourself when nobody else will. But first, let me take you back to March 15th, 2019, the day everything started to change. It was my brother David's 18th birthday party. And as usual, I was just the help. The birthday parties always told the story. Every March, when spring was just beginning to whisper through the trees of our suburban neighborhood, our house would transform into a celebration worthy of royalty. Not for me, of course. My birthday was in November, quietly marked with a grocery store cake and whatever was on clearance at Target. But March belonged to David, my older brother, the golden child who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. I was 16, sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor, watching through my window as Dad carried box after box from his BMW into our backyard. David was turning 18 today, and Mom had been planning this party for months. The local party rental company had delivered tables, chairs, a sound system, and even one of those inflatable bounce houses that seemed ridiculous for a high school senior, but that David had specifically requested. "Alex," Mom's voice carried up the stairs, sharp with the particular brand of irritation she reserved for me. "Come help with the decorations." I closed my calculus textbook, the one I bought used with money from my part-time job at the local grocery store, and headed downstairs. The house buzzed with activity. Mom was directing operations like a military general, her perfectly styled blonde hair not moving despite her frantic gestures. Dad was hanging streamers with the focused intensity he usually reserved for his law practice. Finally, Mom huffed when she saw me. "Take these balloons to the backyard and tie them to the fence. And try not to let any of them fly away. They were expensive. Everything was always expensive when it came to David. His birthday parties, his clothes, his extracurricular activities, his college prep courses. But somehow, there was never money for the things I needed. As I worked in the backyard, tying silver and gold balloons to fence posts, I could hear Mom on the phone inside, bragging to someone about David's latest achievement. He'd been accepted to the University of California system, not his first choice, but still a respectable outcome that Mom would spin into a story of inevitable success. "Oh, yes, we always knew David would go far," she was saying. "He's just naturally gifted, you know? Some children are born with that spark of excellence." I yanked a balloon not tighter than necessary. "Some children. Not all children. Not me. Alex, you missed a spot." I turned to see David standing behind me, looking immaculate in the designer jeans and polo shirt that Mom had bought him specifically for today. At 18, my brother had inherited Dad's tall, lean frame and Mom's classic features. He was objectively handsome in the way that opened doors and made adults smile approvingly. More importantly, he was smart enough to maintain a 3.8 GPA without seeming to try very hard. "I'll get it," I said quietly, reaching for another balloon. David watched me work with an expression I couldn't quite read. We weren't close. How could we be, when our parents had spent our entire lives comparing us, always to his advantage? But he wasn't cruel, exactly. Just distant. Like I was a piece of furniture he'd grown accustomed to seeing around the house. The gift opening ceremony began around 6 o'clock, after everyone had eaten the catered barbecue and custom birthday cake decorated with David's name in elaborate script. I watched from the kitchen window as my brother tore through wrapping paper, revealing present after present that must have cost more than I made in a month at the grocery store. A new MacBook Pro for college, a designer watch, a guitar he'd mentioned wanting exactly once, cash envelopes from relatives who'd been coached on exactly what David needed for his dorm room. The pile of gifts grew higher and higher, and David's smile grew more and more radiant. I remembered my own 16th birthday 4 months earlier. Mom had given me a gift card to Target and apologized that it wasn't for more. Dad had handed me a $20 bill and said something about how I was low maintenance compared to David. That night, as I lay in bed listening to David talk on the phone with friends who were still raving about his party, I made a decision that would change everything. I was tired of being the afterthought, the spared child, the one who existed in David's shadow. I was tired of waiting for my parents to notice that I had potential too. If they wouldn't invest in my future, I'd invest in it myself. If they wouldn't believe in me, I'd believe in me. And if they thought David was the only one in this family destined for greatness, I'd prove them spectacularly wrong. I just had no idea how much that decision would cost me, or how much it would ultimately change all of our lives. 2. Junior year of high school is supposed to be the time when everything gets serious, when grades matter for college applications, when every test score could determine your future, when parents start having intense conversations about SAT prep and campus visits. For David, that's exactly what happened. For me, it was just another year of being reminded that I wasn't worth the investment. David, your SAT tutor, called. Mom announced over dinner on a Tuesday evening in October. She wants to adjust your schedule to add an extra session before the November test. I told her that was fine. We'll make whatever sacrifices necessary to get you the score you deserve. David nodded seriously, cutting into the steak that Mom had made specially for him. He'd mentioned the night before that he was craving red meat for protein, and she'd immediately adjusted her meal plan. When I'd asked for vegetarian options a few months earlier, she told me I could make my own food if I was going to be difficult. What about you, Alex? Dad asked, almost as an afterthought. Have you thought about taking the SAT soon? I'm planning to take it in the spring, I replied. I've been studying with prep books from the library. Prep books from the library? Mom's voice carried that particular tone of disappointment I'd come to know so well. Alex, you can't be serious about competing with students who have professional tutoring. The SAT is too important to leave to chance. I'm doing fine with the books, I said quietly. I've been taking practice tests, and my scores are improving. What kind of scores? Dad pressed. I hesitated. My practice scores were actually quite good, consistently in the 1400s, which would put me in the running for competitive schools. But I'd learned not to share my academic successes too enthusiastically. Somehow, when I did well, it was treated as a fluke or a sign that the test had been too easy. When David did well, it was evidence of his natural brilliance. Around 1400, I admitted. Dad and Mom exchanged a look across the table. Alex, honey, Mom said in that condescending tone she used when she thought I was being unrealistic. Practice tests aren't the same as the real thing. And 1400 isn't going to get you into the same caliber of schools David is applying to. Maybe you should consider more appropriate expectations. What kind of expectations? I asked. Well, Dad cleared his throat. Community college is nothing to be ashamed of. Lots of perfectly successful people start at community colleges and transfer after 2 years. It's more economical and, frankly, it might be a better fit for your academic level. Your academic level. The phrase hit me like a slap. I was maintaining a 3.9 GPA while working 20 hours a week at the grocery store. I was taking AP classes and consistently scoring among the top students in my grade. But in my parents' eyes, I was still the academic underachiever who needed to adjust my expectations downward. I was thinking about applying to some 4-year schools, I said carefully. Maybe even some competitive ones. Competitive schools require more than just decent grades, Mom said dismissively. They want well-rounded students with leadership experience, impressive extracurriculars, strong standardized test scores. David has been building that kind of resume since middle school. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. researching colleges on the library computer I'd managed to access through my school account. Not just any colleges, the best colleges, the ones that would prove, once and for all, that I was more than my parents had ever imagined. MIT appeared on my screen like a beacon. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology consistently ranked as one of the top universities in the world. The kind of school that turned out Nobel Prize winners and billionaire entrepreneurs and people who literally changed the world through their innovations. I read their admissions requirements with growing excitement. They wanted students who were passionate about math and science. Check. They valued creativity and problem solving over rote memorization. Double check. They offered need-based financial aid that could cover full tuition for qualified students. Triple check. Most importantly, they seemed to understand that brilliance could come from unexpected places. Their admissions essays asked about overcoming challenges, about finding ways to pursue your passions despite obstacles, about what unique perspective you would bring to their community. I had challenges. I had obstacles. And I definitely had a unique perspective. I was the invisible child in a family that had taught me to fight for every opportunity, to find my own way when no one else would help me find it. The invisible child was about to make herself impossible to ignore. 3. November arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything seem possible. While David stressed over his early decision application to Stanford, his reach school, according to Dad's extensive research, I was quietly executing a plan that would have shocked my family if they'd known about it. My SAT test date was November 15th. I'd been studying with a religious intensity that probably wasn't healthy, but I couldn't afford to leave anything to chance. Every morning before school, I worked through math problems at the kitchen table. Every lunch period, I was in the library with vocabulary flashcards. Every evening after my shift at the grocery store, I took practice tests until my eyes burned and my hand cramped from filling in bubbles. "You're certainly dedicated to your studies," Mrs. Rodriguez, my AP calculus teacher, commented one afternoon as I packed up my materials. "Are you preparing for something specific?" "Just the SAT," I said, not mentioning that I was aiming for a score high enough to get me into the most competitive technical university in the country. "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up. Your working class has been exceptional this semester." Exceptional. It was a word I'd never heard applied to me at home, where David's B+ in advanced biology was celebrated, while my A+ in AP calculus went unremarked. That afternoon, I stopped by Mr. Patterson's office. He taught AP physics and had become something of a mentor over the past year, recognizing my intuitive understanding of complex concepts and encouraging me to push harder than the standard curriculum required. "Alex," he greeted me warmly. "Perfect timing. I was just reviewing the solutions to those quantum mechanics problems I gave you last week. Your approach to the wave function analysis was genuinely innovative." "Thank you," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Actually, I was hoping to ask you about something. I'm going to need recommendation letters for college applications, and I was wondering—" "Of course," he said immediately. "I'd be honored to write you a recommendation. Are you looking at engineering programs?" "MIT," I said quietly. "I'm applying to MIT." Mr. Patterson's eyebrows shot up, but not with skepticism, with excitement. "MIT? Alex, that's fantastic. They'd be lucky to have you. Your understanding of physics concepts is already at a college level, and your problem-solving instincts are remarkable. You really think I have a chance?" "I think you have more than a chance. I think you're exactly the kind of student they're looking for, passionate, creative, unafraid to tackle challenges that intimidate other people." The SAT was held at the high school on a gray Saturday morning that felt heavy with possibility. I arrived early, armed with pencils and a calculator and the kind of nervous energy that comes from knowing everything is riding on the next 4 hours. The math section felt like coming home. Numbers and equations had always made sense to me in a way that social situations and family dynamics never did. I moved through the problems with confidence, pausing only occasionally to double-check my work. When time was called on the final section, I felt cautiously optimistic. I'd prepared as thoroughly as possible, given the constraints of my situation. Now I had to wait 6 weeks for results and hope that my self-directed preparation could compete with David's professionally managed test prep program. The next phase of my secret plan involved the MIT application itself. I'd downloaded the forms weeks earlier and had been working on them in carefully hidden moments, during break times at work, in empty classrooms before school started, at the library when I was supposedly doing homework. The personal essays were the hardest part. MIT wanted to know who I was beyond my grades and test scores. They wanted stories that revealed character, passion, resilience. They wanted to understand what I would contribute to their community and how their education would help me change the world. I wrote about growing up invisible in a family that celebrated one kind of excellence while missing another entirely. I wrote about discovering my love for mathematics in a household that assumed I'd never excel at anything particularly challenging. I wrote about working at the grocery store and finding beauty in the way supply chains and inventory systems represented complex mathematical relationships playing out in real time. Most importantly, I wrote about what it meant to believe in yourself when no one else did. To find your own way forward when the people who were supposed to guide you had already decided you weren't worth the investment. To discover that your greatest strength might be your ability to thrive without support, to build something from nothing, to prove that potential doesn't always announce itself in obvious ways. The application fee was $75, money I'd saved from 3 weeks of grocery store shifts. As I sealed the envelope and walked to the post office on a cold December afternoon, I felt like I was mailing away my old life and betting everything on the possibility of a new one. 4. December felt like the longest month of my life. My SAT scores were supposed to arrive by the 20th. David's early decision result from Stanford was expected around the same time, and I'd submitted my MIT application with a sense of finality that left me both exhilarated and terrified. Meanwhile, life at home continued as if nothing had changed. My parents were consumed with David's college prospects, analyzing every piece of communication from admissions offices and debating whether his backup applications were strong enough. I went to school, worked my shifts at the grocery store, and maintained the careful facade of a dutiful younger sibling who was appropriately focused on more modest goals. Alex, have you given any more thought to community colleges? Dad asked one evening as we sat in the living room. David was upstairs video chatting with friends, and Mom was in the kitchen cleaning up after the elaborate dinner she'd made to celebrate David's completion of his final applications. Some, I said vaguely, not looking up from my calculus homework. There's no shame in starting smaller, Dad continued. Community college can be a great way to save money and figure out what you're really passionate about. Not everyone needs to dive into a 4-year university right away. Not everyone. Just the golden child. Just David, who deserved investment and opportunity and the assumption that he could handle whatever challenges came his way. The SAT scores arrived on December 18th, 2 days earlier than expected. I'd been checking the website obsessively since the 15th, refreshing the page multiple times a day in case the results appeared early. When the numbers finally loaded on my screen, I had to read them 3 times before I believed what I was seeing. 1,500 out of 1,600. I'd scored 1,580 on the SAT, placing me in the 99th percentile nationwide and well within the range of students admitted to the most competitive universities in the country. I stared at the screen for a full 5 minutes, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This wasn't just a good score, it was an exceptional score. The kind of score that proved I belonged in the conversation about elite universities. The kind of score that made MIT seem not just possible, but probable. David's Stanford rejection arrived on December 20th. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich before my afternoon shift when I heard Mom's strangled gasp from the living room, followed by David's voice, tight with disappointment. It's okay. I expected this. Stanford is incredibly competitive. I found them huddled around the computer, staring at the screen with the shell-shocked expressions of people whose carefully constructed plans had just collapsed. It's not fair, Mom said, her voice thick with emotion. David worked so hard. His grades, his test scores, his extracurriculars, everything was perfect. His SAT scores weren't perfect, Dad pointed out grimly. 1480 is excellent, but it's not quite in Stanford's range. We should have pushed for more tutoring sessions. David's SAT score was 1480, which was indeed excellent, but it was 100 points lower than mine. The irony wasn't lost on me, though I kept my expression carefully neutral as I watched my family process this disappointment. That evening, I made a decision. I couldn't keep my SAT scores secret forever, and my family needed some perspective on what constituted academic success. Over dinner, a subdued affair where Mom kept sighing and Dad kept muttering about Stanford's loss, I cleared my throat. "I got my SAT scores," I announced casually, as if I'd just remembered. "Oh." Dad looked up from his food with polite interest. "How did you do?" I pulled the folded score report from my pocket and handed it to him. "See for yourself." Dad's eyebrows rose as he scanned the paper. Then he blinked, read it again, and handed it to Mom without saying a word. 1580? Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. "Alex, is this correct?" "As far as I know," I said mildly. "I can call them to verify if you want." David leaned over to look at the paper, his eyes widening as he processed the numbers. "Alex, this is incredible. This is higher than almost anyone in our school has ever scored." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. "Actually," I said, taking a deep breath, "I applied to MIT." "You applied to MIT?" Dad repeated slowly, as if I'd announced I'd applied to Mars. "With application fee waivers and teacher recommendations and essays and everything," I confirmed. "I submitted my application 2 weeks ago." For the first time in 17 years, my family was talking about my future with the same seriousness they'd always reserved for David's. 5. The months between January and March felt like living in suspended animation. David had recovered from his Stanford disappointment and was cautiously optimistic about his UC applications. My parents had adjusted to the surprising reality that their younger child might be academically gifted, though they still seemed hesitant to fully embrace the possibility that I could succeed where David had struggled. I threw myself into my senior year classes with renewed intensity. My teachers had begun treating me differently after word spread about my SAT scores and MIT application. Mrs. Rodriguez started giving me advanced problem sets that challenged even my improved abilities. Mr. Patterson invited me to help tutor struggling AP Physics students, recognizing that my unconventional approach to complex concepts could reach students who couldn't connect with traditional explanations. At home, family dynamics had shifted in subtle but significant ways. My parents still devoted most of their attention to David's college process, but they'd begun including me in conversations about higher education. They asked about my grades, showed interest in my extracurricular activities, and occasionally mentioned my MIT application to neighbors and family friends. "Alex applied to MIT," I heard Mom telling her sister during a phone conversation. Before I could react, he pulled me into a hug that was fierce and genuine and completely, "Can you believe that?" We always knew she was smart, of course, but we had no idea she was that smart. The waiting became harder in February. My classmates were hearing back from early action schools, and social media was full of acceptance announcements and rejection commiserations. David had been accepted to UC San Diego with a partial scholarship. News that was celebrated but felt anticlimactic after months of hoping for something more prestigious. Meanwhile, I was still waiting to hear from the school that represented the biggest reach I'd ever attempted. MIT's regular decision results were scheduled for release on March 14th, Pi Day, which felt appropriately mathematical for a school that lived and breathed numbers and equations. As the date approached, I found myself caught between hope and terror. I'd done everything I could possibly do within the constraints of my situation. My grades were flawless, my test scores were exceptional, my essays were honest and passionate, and my teacher recommendations were stronger than I'd dared to hope. But MIT accepted fewer than 7% of applicants, and most of those came from backgrounds of privilege and opportunity that made my achievements look modest by comparison. March 14th arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of Seattle weather that matched my internal state of nervous anticipation. MIT had announced that decisions would be released at 6:28 p.m. Eastern Time, 3:28 in the afternoon for Seattle. I'd arranged to leave work early, claiming a doctor's appointment I didn't actually have. I spent the morning in a state of distracted anxiety, unable to focus on classes or conversations or anything that didn't involve obsessively checking the time. At lunch, I sat in the library with my phone, refreshing the MIT admissions website every few minutes in case they released results early. At 3:28 p.m., I refreshed the page one more time and saw the portal had been updated. Admissions decision available. Click here to view. My hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't click the link. When the page loaded, I had to read the first line 3 times before my brain could process what it was telling me. Congratulations. It is our pleasure to inform you that you have been selected for admission to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's class of 2028. I stared at the screen in stunned silence, reading and rereading the words as if they might disappear if I looked away. Admitted to MIT with a full financial aid package that would cover tuition, room, board, and living expenses. The invisible child had just been accepted to one of the most prestigious universities in the world. 6. I was sitting at the kitchen table when my family came home, David arriving first from soccer practice with grass-stained cleats and the particular exhaustion that comes from 2 hours of conditioning drills. "Hey," he said, grabbing a sports drink from the refrigerator. "How was your afternoon?" "Interesting," I replied, trying to keep my voice casual despite the fact that my heart was still racing from the afternoon's revelation. MIT decisions came out today. David froze with the drink halfway to his lips, and I pulled the printed acceptance letter from my backpack and slid it across the table. David set down his drink and read in silence, his expression cycling through surprise, disbelief, and something that looked like genuine pride. "Alex," he said quietly, "this is incredible. This is wow. Full financial aid," I added. "Everything covered." Before I could answer, we heard Mom's car in the driveway, followed immediately by Dad's BMW. They'd apparently carpooled home from their respective offices, which meant they'd be walking in together, probably discussing their days or David's upcoming college decisions. Mom and Dad came through the front door carrying the usual debris of professional life, briefcases, coffee cups, and the slightly frazzled energy of people who'd spent 8 hours managing other people's problems. They were deep in conversation about some legal case Dad was handling, barely acknowledging David and me as they hung up their coats. "How was everyone's day?" Mom asked distractedly, opening the refrigerator and beginning to mentally plan dinner. "Actually," I said, my voice catching slightly, "I have some news." Something in my tone made both parents look up with sudden attention. Dad's briefcase was still in his hand, and Mom had frozen with the refrigerator door open. Both of them suddenly focused on me with an intensity I'd rarely experienced. "MIT decisions came out today," I continued. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator's ice maker cycling through its routine. "And?" Dad asked, his voice carefully neutral. I handed him the acceptance letter. Dad adjusted his reading glasses and scanned the page with the methodical attention he brought to legal documents. I watched his eyebrows rise progressively higher as he absorbed the information. "Full scholarship," he murmured, almost to himself. "Need-based aid covering tuition, room, board, and living expenses." He looked up at me, his expression stunned. "Alex, this is extraordinary." Mom took the letter from Dad's hands and read it herself, her lips moving silently as she processed each line. When she finished, she looked at me as if she was seeing me for the first time. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "When did you apply? How did you pay for the application fee? Who helped you with your essays?" "I applied in December using fee waivers. Mr. Patterson and Mrs. Rodriguez wrote my recommendations. I wrote the essays myself." I paused, then added quietly, "I did everything myself." The weight of that admission settled over the kitchen like a physical presence. For 17 years, my parents had managed every detail of David's academic development while leaving me to figure things out independently. Now they were confronting the reality that their hands-off approach had somehow produced a result more impressive than all their careful investment in their golden child. David stood up from his chair and walked around the table to where I was sitting unexpected. "I'm so proud of you," he said into my ear. "And I'm sorry it took something this dramatic for all of us to realize how amazing you are." When David released me, I saw that Mom's eyes were filled with tears. She came around the table next and hugged me even tighter than David had, her voice thick with emotion. "Alex, I don't know what to say. We never imagined you were capable of something like this. I know, I said simply. That evening, Mom called everyone she could think of, grandparents, aunts and uncles, family friends, neighbors, to share the news of my acceptance. I listened from the living room as she repeated the story again and again, her voice growing more animated with each telling. The invisible child who'd once felt overlooked and undervalued had become the center of attention in a household that had revolved around David for as long as I could remember. 7. The weeks following my MIT acceptance were unlike anything I'd experienced in our family. Suddenly I was the good one, and I was occasionally overwhelming to be the focus of so much interest and pride. Mom threw herself into planning for my future with the same intensity she'd once reserved for David's activities. She researched Boston housing, MIT's academic programs, and the logistics of cross-country college preparation with an enthusiasm that would have felt wonderful if it hadn't been so obviously driven by guilt. Alex, I found this article about MIT's undergraduate research opportunities, she announced over breakfast one morning, brandishing her laptop like she discovered buried treasure. Did you know they have programs where freshmen can work directly with professors on cutting-edge projects? I mentioned that in my application essay, I replied gently. It's one of the reasons I wanted to go there. Of course you did, Mom said, looking flustered. I should have known you'd already researched everything thoroughly. Dad had thrown himself into the financial planning aspects of my college future, even though the full scholarship meant there wasn't much to plan. He kept finding excuses to mention my achievement to colleagues and clients, working MIT into conversations with the pride of someone who just discovered he'd been sitting on a winning lottery ticket. David was handling the change dynamics with more grace than I would have expected. If he felt overshadowed by his younger sister's unexpected achievement, he didn't show it. Instead, he seemed genuinely happy for me and relieved to share the burden of being the family success story. It's nice not to be the only one with pressure to achieve great things, he confided one evening as we both worked on homework. I always felt like I was carrying everyone's expectations for both of us. The celebration dinner Mom had planned turned into a neighborhood event. Word of my MIT acceptance had spread through our suburban community with the speed of significant gossip, and suddenly everyone wanted to congratulate the family on our remarkable daughter. We always knew Alex was special, Mrs. Patterson from next door told my parents, apparently forgetting that she'd never expressed any particular interest in my academic development before. You must be so proud. I found myself feeling oddly protective of my parents during these interactions. Yes, they'd failed to see my potential for 17 years. Yes, they'd systematically invested in David's future while leaving me to figure things out independently. But they were good people who genuinely loved both their children, even if they'd shown that love unevenly. More importantly, their neglect had accidentally been the best thing that could have happened to my development. If they'd managed my academic career the way they'd managed David's, I might never have developed the independence, resourcefulness, and self-reliance that had ultimately gotten me into MIT. 2 weeks before graduation, I received an unexpected visitor at work. I was restocking the bread aisle when Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the grocery store, looking slightly out of place among the shopping carts and fluorescent lighting. Mrs. Rodriguez, I said, surprised to see my calculus teacher outside of school. What are you doing here? I wanted to congratulate you properly, she said, pulling me into a warm hug. And I want to give you something. She handed me a wrapped package that felt like a book. Inside was a first edition copy of A Mathematician's Apology by G.H. Hardy with an inscription on the title page. To Alex, who proved that brilliance doesn't always announce itself in obvious ways. Congratulations on your achievement and your courage. Mrs. Rodriguez. Thank you, I said, hugging the book to my chest. For everything. For believing in me. For writing my recommendation letter. For pushing me to work harder than I thought I could. Thank you for reminding me why I became a teacher in the first place, she replied. Students like you are the reason this job is a privilege, not just a profession. Everything had changed, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. 8. High school graduation arrived on a perfect June morning. The kind of day that felt designed for new beginnings and the promise of unlimited futures. I stood in the bathroom mirror, adjusting my cap and gown, and marveled at how different I felt from the invisible child who'd started senior year just 9 months earlier. The girl in the mirror looked the same dark hair, same serious eyes, same unassuming presence that had allowed me to move through 17 years of life without drawing much attention. But something fundamental had changed. There was a confidence in my expression that hadn't been there before, a sense of possibility that came from knowing I was capable of more than anyone had ever imagined. "Alex, are you ready?" Mom called from downstairs. "We need to leave in 5 minutes." The "we" was significant. For David's graduation 2 years earlier, Mom and Dad had each taken the day off work, arrived early to secure front row seats, and brought a professional photographer to document every moment. For mine, they'd done exactly the same thing, a level of attention and investment that still felt strange and wonderful. I grabbed my phone and headed downstairs to find my entire family waiting in the foyer. David had driven up from UC San Diego, where he was finishing his freshman year with solid grades and a growing appreciation for marine biology. He looked happy and relaxed in a way I'd rarely seen during his high-pressure high school years. "There's the MIT genius," he said, grinning as he straightened my graduation cap. "Ready to conquer the world?" "Ready to try," I replied. The graduation ceremony itself was a blur of familiar rituals, processional music, welcoming remarks, the reading of names that I'd been hearing in school announcements for 4 years. I sat with my fellow honors students in the front rows, waiting to hear my name called as salutatorian. When Principal Davis announced the salutatorian address, I walked to the podium on legs that felt disconnected from my body. The auditorium stretched out before me, filled with families who'd come to celebrate their own children's achievements. "Good morning," I began, my voice carrying better than I'd expected across the packed auditorium. "My name is Alex Chun, and I want to talk to you today about invisible excellence." I told them about students who succeeded without fanfare, who achieved remarkable things without recognition, who developed their talents in the shadows while others claimed the spotlight. I talked about the power of self-motivation, the strength that comes from believing in yourself when no one else does, and the particular satisfaction of exceeding expectations that were never very high to begin with. "Excellence isn't always obvious," I concluded. "Sometimes it's quiet, persistent, patient. Sometimes it takes years to reveal itself. But when it does, it's worth the wait." The applause that followed felt warm and genuine, not just polite acknowledgement, but real appreciation for words that had resonated with people's experiences. When my name was called for my diploma, I crossed the stage with the knowledge that this moment represented more than just the end of high school. It was the conclusion of my invisible childhood and the beginning of a future where my potential would finally be recognized and nurtured. After the ceremony, my family found me in the crowd of graduates and families celebrating outside the auditorium. Mom reached me first, pulling me into a hug that lifted me off my feet. "Alex, that speech was incredible," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea you were such a talented writer and speaker." "There's a lot you don't know about me yet," I replied gently. "But we have time to figure it out." As we walked back to the car, surrounded by other families processing their own milestone moments, I felt a profound sense of completion. The invisible child had graduated as salutatorian, with a full scholarship to MIT and a family that finally saw her clearly. But more importantly, I'd learned to see myself clearly. I understood my own worth, my own potential, my own ability to achieve remarkable things when I was willing to believe in myself and work for what I wanted. Everything had changed, and the best was yet to come. 3 months later, I stood in the doorway of my dorm room at MIT, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the nervous energy of 1,000 new beginnings. My roommate hadn't arrived yet, so I had a few precious moments alone to absorb the reality that I was actually here, actually a student at one of the most prestigious universities in the world. The room was small but functional, 2 beds, 2 desks, 2 dressers, and a window that looked out onto the courtyard where other freshmen were saying goodbye to their parents. I could hear fragments of conversations drifting up from below. Last-minute reminders about laundry and studying, promises to call home regularly, emotional farewells between families who might not see each other until Thanksgiving. My own family had said their goodbyes that morning at the Seattle airport, a scene that would have been unimaginable just a year earlier. Mom had cried, Dad had given me advice about managing my time and taking advantage of research opportunities, and David had hugged me with genuine affection and pride. Remember that you belong here, he told me as we waited for my boarding call. You earned this. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve it. My roommate arrived an hour later with her parents and what appeared to be the contents of a small electronics store. Jessica Wu from California, whose father was a tech executive and whose mother was a renowned surgeon. She'd attended a private prep school that cost more per year than my parents made combined, had spent her summers at prestigious academic camps, and spoke 3 languages fluently. You must be Alex, she said warmly, despite the fact that we'd only exchanged a few emails over the summer. I'm so excited to be roommates. I read your admissions essay online. It was incredible. My admissions essay is online. Oh, MIT publishes some of the best ones each year. Yours was one of the featured essays about overcoming challenges. It was really inspiring. I felt a flush of pride mixed with embarrassment. I'd written that essay in the library after work, pouring my heart onto the page, about growing up invisible in a family that celebrated one kind of excellence while missing another. The fact that it had been good enough to feature publicly felt surreal. After Jessica's parents left, we spent the evening getting to know each other and comparing our backgrounds. The differences were striking but not uncomfortable. She was genuinely curious about my experience and seemed impressed by what I'd accomplished without the advantages she'd taken for granted. So you really applied to MIT completely on your own? She asked as we organized our shared living space. No college counselor, no professional essay help, no family connections. Just me, some library books, and a lot of determination, I confirmed. That's incredible. I had a team of people helping me with my applications. I can't imagine doing it all myself. You probably could have, I said. You just never had to find out. Over the first few weeks of classes, I discovered that MIT was everything I'd hoped and more challenging than I'd imagined. My professors weren't just teachers, they were researchers, innovators, people who were actively expanding the boundaries of human knowledge in their fields. My classmates weren't just smart, they were passionate, driven, curious about everything from quantum mechanics to artificial intelligence to sustainable energy solutions. The key to succeeding here, Professor Martinez told us during our first advanced mathematics seminar, isn't just intelligence, it's resilience. You're going to encounter problems that seem impossible, concepts that don't make sense initially, projects that push you beyond your comfort zone. The students who thrive are the ones who see those challenges as opportunities rather than obstacles. I thought about the years I'd spent teaching myself, working through problems that seemed impossible, developing concepts that didn't make sense initially. Maybe my unconventional preparation had been better training for MIT than I'd realized. My first real test came in Professor Chen's no relation theoretical physics class, notorious for its difficulty and the professor's unwillingness to accept anything less than perfection. The midterm exam was scheduled for the 6th week of the semester, and the entire class was in a state of barely controlled panic. I've been studying for 3 weeks, Jessica confided as we sat in the library, surrounded by physics textbooks and energy drinks. My parents hired a graduate student to tutor me, but I still don't feel ready. I'd been studying too, but differently. Instead of memorizing formulas and practicing standard problems, I'd been trying to understand the underlying principles, the fundamental relationships that connected seemingly disparate concepts. It was the same approach I'd used in high school when I couldn't afford tutoring and had to figure things out for myself. The exam was brutal. 3 hours of complex problems that required not just computational skills, but genuine understanding of advanced physics concepts. I watched several classmates leave early, their faces showing the defeat of people who'd encountered something beyond their preparation. But as I worked through the problems, I felt the familiar satisfaction of pieces falling into place. The concepts I'd been wrestling with for weeks suddenly made sense in the context of specific applications. The patterns I'd been noticing in my studying revealed themselves as elegant solutions to seemingly impossible questions. When Professor Chen handed back our exams the following week, the class average was a sobering 67%. Jessica had earned a 72, which she considered a personal failure despite it being above average. Several students who'd come from prestigious prep schools had scored in the 50s and were seriously considering dropping the class. Alex Chen. Professor Chen called my name as class ended. Please see me after class. My heart sank. I'd thought the exam had gone well, but maybe I'd been overconfident. Maybe the problems I'd thought I'd solved correctly were actually completely wrong. Your exam, Professor Chen said when the classroom had emptied, was exceptional. Not just the highest score in the class, 96%, but genuinely innovative in its approach to several problems. I stared at him in shock. 96%. You solved the quantum mechanics problem using a method I've never seen from an undergraduate. Where did you learn that approach? I figured it out myself, I admitted. The standard method wasn't making sense to me, so I tried to think about it differently. Professor Chen smiled. The first time I'd seen him look genuinely pleased, rather than grimly challenging. That's exactly the kind of thinking that leads to breakthroughs in physics. You're not just learning concepts, you're discovering new ways to understand them. He handed me back my exam, the pages marked with enthusiastic comments, and a note at the top, outstanding work. Please see me about undergraduate research opportunities. As I walked back to my dorm, clutching the exam that proved I could compete with the best students in the world, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The invisible child who taught herself calculus in high school had just earned the highest score in one of MIT's most difficult classes. But more than that, I discovered something important about myself. The years of independent learning, of figuring things out without guidance, of developing my own approaches to complex problems, all of that had given me exactly the kind of intellectual flexibility and creativity that MIT valued most. I wasn't just succeeding despite my unconventional background. I was succeeding because of it. 10. By the end of my freshman year, I had settled into MIT with a confidence I hadn't expected to find. The intimidation of being surrounded by brilliant students had given way to the realization that I belonged among them, not because I was the smartest person in every room, but because I brought a unique perspective and approach to problem solving that complemented their talents. Professor Chen had invited me to join his research group, working on theoretical applications of quantum mechanics that were at the cutting edge of current physics knowledge. It was the kind of opportunity that most students didn't access until their junior or senior years, but my performance in his class had convinced him I was ready for advanced work. Alex has an intuitive grasp of complex concepts that can't be taught, he told the other members of our research team during my first meeting. She sees patterns and connections that aren't obvious, and she's not afraid to challenge conventional approaches when they don't make sense. The research work was demanding but exhilarating. I spent hours in the lab, running simulations and analyzing data, working alongside graduate students and postdocs who treated me as an intellectual equal rather than an undergraduate learning the basics. My contributions to the team's projects were significant enough that Professor Chen suggested I might be ready to present our findings at a national physics conference. Are you sure? I asked when he broached the idea. I'm just a freshman. Age and class standing are irrelevant, he replied. What matters is the quality of your work and your understanding of the material. Both are exceptional. The conference was in Chicago, a gathering of physicists from around the world presenting their latest research. I had never been to a professional academic conference, had never presented research to an audience of experts, had never even imagined myself in such a setting just 2 years earlier. But standing at the podium, looking out at an auditorium full of professors and researchers who were genuinely interested in what I had to say, I felt the same confidence that had carried me through my high school salutatorian speech. I had something valuable to contribute, and I was ready to share it. Our research suggests that quantum entanglement effects can be predicted and controlled using novel mathematical models. I began, clicking to my first slide. Traditional approaches have limitations that we've been able to overcome through interdisciplinary applications of topology and number theory. The presentation went better than I'd dared to hope. The audience asked thoughtful questions that showed they were engaged with our work, and several researchers approached me afterward to discuss potential collaborations and applications. Impressive work, said Dr. Sarah Kim, a professor from Stanford whose papers I'd been reading since high school. How long have you been working on this research? About 8 months, I replied. And you're an undergraduate? Freshman, actually. Dr. Kim looked stunned. Would you be interested in a summer research position at Stanford? We're working on related problems, and your approach could be exactly what we need to make a breakthrough. I accepted her offer on the spot, knowing that this kind of opportunity would accelerate my research experience and open doors I hadn't even imagined yet. But more importantly, it confirmed something I'd begun to suspect. The invisible child who taught herself to excel had become someone whose work was valued by the top researchers in her field. When I called my parents that evening to tell them about the conference and the Stanford offer, their pride was overwhelming and genuine. Alex, we're so incredibly proud of you, Mom said, her voice thick with emotion. When I think about how close we came to missing this, how close we came to never recognizing what you were capable of. But you did recognize it, I said gently. Maybe not at first, but you got there eventually. That's what matters. Are you happy? Dad asked. Really happy? It was a question that cut to the heart of everything, not just academic success or professional opportunities, but genuine satisfaction with the life I was building. Yes, I said, and meant it completely. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The summer at Stanford was transformative in ways I hadn't expected. Working with Dr. Kim's research group, I was treated not as a student learning the basics, but as a researcher contributing to cutting-edge discoveries. My MIT background had prepared me well for the theoretical work, but Stanford's collaborative environment taught me new ways to communicate complex ideas and work effectively with diverse teams. You have a gift for explaining difficult concepts, Dr. Kim told me during my final week. Have you considered an academic career? Teaching and research? I've thought about it, I admitted, but I'm not sure I'm ready to commit to such a specific path yet. That's wise. You have time to explore different options, and your combination of theoretical understanding and practical application skills will be valuable in many fields. She paused. But I hope you'll consider staying in research, at least for graduate school. The physics community needs more people who can think the way you think. When I returned to MIT for sophomore year, I carried with me not just the research experience and professional connections I gained at Stanford, but a deeper understanding of my own potential and place in the academic world. The invisible child had become a recognized researcher, someone whose work was valued by experts and whose future seemed bright with possibility. But more importantly, I'd learned that success wasn't just about individual achievement. It was about finding ways to contribute to something larger than yourself, to use your talents in service of advancing human knowledge and understanding. 11. Thanksgiving of my sophomore year was the first time our entire family had been together since I'd started at MIT. David was thriving at UC San Diego, having found his passion in marine biology and discovered that he was happiest when he wasn't trying to live up to impossible expectations. I was home from Cambridge with stories of research conferences and graduate-level courses, and professors who treated me like a colleague. The dynamics around our dinner table had shifted so completely from my high school years that it felt like we were playing different roles in the same family drama. Tell us about your research, Mom prompted as we sat down to the elaborate meal she'd prepared with her characteristic attention to detail. I launched into an explanation of my current project, a collaboration between MIT and Stanford examining quantum applications for computational problems. As I talked, I noticed my parents listening with the kind of focused attention they'd once reserved exclusively for David's achievements. I don't understand half of what you're saying, Dad admitted with a laugh, but I'm incredibly proud that you're doing work that's advancing the field of physics. What about you? I asked David, how's the marine biology program? David's face lit up in a way I'd rarely seen during his high-pressure high school years. Amazing. I'm working on a research project studying coral reef restoration, and I think I might want to focus on environmental conservation for graduate school. That sounds perfect for you, I said, and meant it. David had always been happiest when he was working with his hands, solving practical problems, making direct contributions to causes he cared about. The pressure to pursue prestige for its own sake had never suited his temperament. It's funny, he continued. I spent so much of high school trying to get into the most competitive programs, but the work I'm doing now is more meaningful than anything I did when I was focused on impressing colleges. Mom, and Dad exchanged a look across the table. One of those wordless parental communications that acknowledge their own role in creating the pressure David was describing. We made mistakes, Mom said quietly. With both of you, but in different ways. We pushed David too hard toward goals that weren't necessarily his own, and we didn't push Alex enough toward opportunities she deserved. You were doing your best with the information you had, I replied. Parents aren't perfect. Kids aren't perfect. Families figure things out as they go along. But we should have seen your potential earlier, Dad said. We should have invested in your education the way we invested in David's. We should have celebrated your achievements and supported your ambitions. If you had, I said carefully, I might never have developed the independence and self-reliance that got me into MIT in the first place. Sometimes the best thing parents can do is step back and let their children find their own way forward. It was a generous interpretation of their neglect, and I knew it. But it was also true that my unconventional path had given me exactly the qualities I needed to succeed in an environment that valued creativity, initiative, and the ability to work independently. Still, Mom said, we want to do better going forward. We want to support both of you in whatever directions your lives take. You are supporting us, David pointed out. You're here. You're interested. You're proud of what we're accomplishing. That's what matters now. After dinner, David and I found ourselves washing dishes together, a chore that had once been mine alone while he enjoyed the privileges of being the golden child. Now we work side by side, both of us recognizing how much our relationship had improved since we'd stopped competing for our parents' attention. Do you ever resent how they treated you? He asked as he dried a serving platter. Sometimes, I admitted, but mostly I'm grateful for where it led me. The years of being overlooked taught me to believe in myself when no one else did. That's a valuable skill. I resented sometimes, David said quietly. Not your success. I'm genuinely proud of what you've accomplished, but the fact that they missed so much of who you really are. They were so focused on managing my future that they didn't notice they had another child who was quietly becoming extraordinary. We're all learning, I said. Them, us, everyone. The important thing is that we're in a better place now than we were 2 years ago. Do you think we would have been closer if they'd treated us more equally? I considered the question while scrubbing a stubborn spot on a casserole dish. Maybe. Or maybe we needed this journey to become the people we are now. Maybe the contrast was necessary for both of us to find our own paths. David nodded thoughtfully. I think I'm a better person now that I'm not carrying all the family's expectations for success. And you're clearly thriving now that your potential is finally being recognized and nurtured. We're both where we belong, I agreed. That evening, as I sat in my childhood bedroom looking through old textbooks and papers from high school, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The invisible child who'd once felt overlooked and undervalued had become a confident young woman whose work was respected by leading researchers in her field. But more than that, I'd learned that family relationships could evolve and improve, that people were capable of recognizing their mistakes and growing from them, and that love, even imperfect love, could find ways to heal old wounds and build new connections. My parents had failed me in important ways during my childhood, but they were succeeding now in their efforts to know me better, support my ambitions, and build the kind of relationship we should have had all along. Sometimes the best gifts come wrapped in the most unlikely packages. Sometimes being overlooked teaches you to value yourself. Sometimes the longest journey home is the one that leads you back to family members who finally see you clearly. The invisible child had become impossible to ignore. But more importantly, she'd learned that her visibility and success were gifts to be shared, not weapons to be wielded against people who'd underestimated her. Everything had changed, and it was all leading somewhere better than any of us had imagined possible. Epilogue, 5 years later. I stood at the podium in MIT's largest lecture hall, looking out at an audience of students, faculty, and distinguished guests who had gathered for my doctoral dissertation defense. 5 years had passed since I'd first walked through MIT's doors as an uncertain freshman, and now I was about to defend research that had the potential to revolutionize quantum computing applications. In the front row, I spotted my family, mom and dad, both beaming with pride that had long since evolved from surprise to genuine understanding of my capabilities. David, now a marine biology PhD candidate at Scripps, who'd driven up from San Diego specifically for this day, and sitting next to them, Professor Chen and Dr. Kim, mentors who'd believed in my potential from the beginning and helped me develop into the researcher I'd become. My dissertation examines novel applications of topological quantum computing for solving previously intractable mathematical problems. I began, my voice carrying clearly across the packed auditorium. The implications extend beyond pure mathematics into fields ranging from cryptography to materials science to artificial intelligence. As I presented 5 years of research, work that had already resulted in 3 published papers and a patent application, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The invisible child who'd once taught herself calculus in her family's kitchen had become a researcher whose work was being considered for implementation by major technology companies. But the recognition and professional success, while satisfying, weren't the most important changes in my life. The real transformation had been in my family relationships, which had evolved from neglect and favoritism to genuine mutual respect and support. After my defense, which went brilliantly, with my committee unanimously approving my research, my family took me to dinner at the same restaurant where we'd celebrated my MIT acceptance 5 years earlier. "So, Dr. Chun," David said, grinning as he raised his wine glass, "what's next? MIT has offered you a postdoc position, Stanford wants you back, and I heard Google is trying to recruit you." "I'm still deciding," I said honestly. "There are a lot of good options, and I want to choose the path that will let me have the biggest impact on advancing the field." "Whatever you choose," Mom said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, "we'll be proud of you. Not because of your achievements, though they're remarkable, but because of who you've become, someone who uses her gifts to contribute something meaningful to the world." It was the kind of unconditional support I'd once thought was reserved only for golden children. Now, I understood that it had always been available. I just needed to help my parents learn how to see me clearly enough to offer it. "Thank you," I said, looking around the table at these people who'd taken such a long journey with me. "All of you, for growing, for changing, for figuring out how to be family to each other." Later that evening, as we walked through MIT's campus under stars that were barely visible through the city's light pollution, David and I found ourselves reflecting on how different our lives had become from what anyone had expected when we were children. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if they'd believed in you from the beginning?" he asked. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I think things worked out the way they were supposed to. The years of being overlooked taught me things I couldn't have learned any other way. Independence, self-reliance, the ability to believe in myself when no one else does. Those qualities have been essential to every success I've had since." "I'm glad," he said simply. "Not that you were overlooked. That was wrong, and it hurt you in ways I'm still sorry about. But I'm glad that it ultimately led you to become someone extraordinary." "We're both extraordinary," I corrected, "just in different ways, on different timelines, with different kinds of support and challenges." As we reached the dormitory where I'd first learned to see myself as someone whose potential was unlimited, I felt a profound sense of completion. The invisible child's journey was over. The confident woman who'd taken her place was ready for whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. 3 months later, I accepted a research position at a prestigious national laboratory, leading a team developing quantum computing applications for climate modeling and renewable energy optimization. It was work that combined my theoretical research with practical applications that could help address some of the world's most pressing challenges. My parents came to my going-away party, and I watched them interact with my colleagues and mentors with the easy pride of people who'd learned to see their daughter clearly. They asked thoughtful questions about my research, bragged appropriately about my achievements, and radiated the kind of unconditional support I'd once thought was impossible for them to feel about me. "We love you," Mom said as she hugged me goodbye. "Not because you're successful, though you are. Not because you've achieved remarkable things, though you have. We love you because you're our daughter, and we're grateful every day that we finally learned how to see you for who you really are." "I love you too," I replied, and meant it completely. The invisible child who'd once felt overlooked and undervalued had become a confident woman whose work would contribute to solving problems that mattered. But more importantly, she'd learned that family could grow and change, that love could find ways to heal old wounds, and that sometimes the greatest achievements were the relationships you built and rebuilt along the way. Everything had changed, and everything was exactly as it should be. If you love this story, kindly hit the subscribe button. See you next time, lovelies.